Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome back to the Climate Action in Buildings series. Today with us we have Hamdul Moeed, who works in AC industry in Pakistan. And in this chat, we are going to talk about sustainable or unsustainable practices, building practices in construction industry in Pakistan. Welcome, Hamdul Moeed, and please, floor
Thank
is
you.
yours to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Um, as you've told everyone, my name is Moeed Riaz. I am basically, my academic background is of architectural engineering, and I've been working in the AEC industry, AEC, the architectural engineering and construction industry in Pakistan for the last 15 years. My initial working experience and the way it all panned out in my career, it led me to get a very holistic view of how construction, the whole industry actually, the design, construction, execution, and the complete project lifecycle, how it works in Pakistan, what are the idiosyncrasies of working in this country. And through that, through the experience that I got on multiple levels, through the design and the consultancy part of buildings and building construction, the execution part, the project management part, I came to certain conclusions about how it's currently being done here. And my forte, I'd call it forte, or my expertise in the last few years has become innovation in how construction is being done in
Mhm.
Pakistan, and trying to change the way people think of constructing any building, whether that be residential, commercial, or industrial, how people think of executing any such project here in Pakistan. So, through our latest venture, which is called the Building Zero, we are trying to pioneer net zero energy housing and also working towards commercial buildings in Pakistan, and trying to bring it to the mainstream rather than having certain projects which work in a bubble. We are trying to bring all that innovation, sustainable initiatives through practices that are more coherent with how construction industry works in Pakistan. We are trying to bring it to the mainstream. And that's how I think you have also come to know me, and therefore I'm
Yeah.
here.
So can you talk more about your journey? I understand you started with like you moved into it and that's how. So how this journey has been for you? Has it been rewarding or challenging, and like especially in context of Pakistan?
Yes. Actually, I was never meant to be an engineer. That's probably not something that I thought that I'd do. It's, because of my friends, probably, that I thought that probably engineering is the only thing that's going to be of any benefit in Pakistan, or it's probably something that people aspire to be. So I came into engineering. The only good thing that I did was that I did not go into any engineering. That, how it works in Pakistan is your merit list decides where you end up being. So even though I could have gone to other engineering institutions or in other engineering faculties, I decided on doing architectural engineering. From there, when we graduated, I one way or the other, of course, as I had to work in Pakistan, so I got into the industry here, and certain things that academically we never quite see, we end up seeing them when you get into the industry actually.
Mm-hmm.
So the way it's done, the construction practices, the design practices, the philosophies, how a lot of it has to be customer centric, but the fact that the requirements of any clients or any builders or investors in Pakistan have not moved on with the times, and they probably are still looking for things that were probably relevant 20 years ago. Through all of that, I looked into ways in which we could change the way all of those things are being done. My journey took me to constructing a house, through where I had to face challenges from the contractors, even the client himself, on how I wanted to approach it. We decided on using EPS in our plasters. We decided to use EPS in how we insulated the roof, and a number of other factors. So, and through all of that, I realized that there is a lot of inertia when it comes to working in Pakistan and trying to bring about any change in how buildings are seen here. There's been numerous things, there have been numerous factors involved, and throughout this conversation, I'll be touching upon all of those. Just in a nutshell, I think it's a challenging environment for anyone to try and change the perception towards buildings in Pakistan. It's a very challenging environment because a lot of it is very capital centric. The how projects are looked at in Pakistan. It's very capital centric. Short term, immediate objectives are prioritized over long term solutions and long term gains. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
inertia. It needs a lot of effort to move those blocks which are currently here.
Yeah. So I'm interested to know, where did you gather this courage to start something or like as challenging as the building zero in a country like Pakistan? Because I've lived my entire life in this country, and I can imagine how challenging the positive change can be in Pakistan.
Uh, it was always very close to my heart when I started working here, and especially when I founded my own first company. When I started to get my own projects, it was always very close to my heart because when we are working in the field, we realize there are certain idiosyncrasies in how the AC industry works here in Pakistan. There were a number of factors which were dissuading for any person who wants to bring certain innovation or even wants to work completely professionally. So when I saw, for example, when I saw the quality of the brick being used here in Pakistan, so we were starting with a very basic unit of how construction is being done. So I realized there were a number of problems that were intrinsic part of using that brick. But just because it's been done for a century or more than a century now, the burnt clay brick that's used in Pakistan all over, people are so inherently opposed to change or trying to do anything that is just not traditional or not the way that they've seen it. I realized that even on the very basic level, we need to change things to make a difference because my own projects were suffering. A lot of things that people now have come to terms with, and they think that this is just part of working here in Pakistan, were things that could easily be solved if certain little changes were to be made in the construction cycle of any project. So when I saw that, I initially set up my own brick making plant as well. So we changed the way they were made. We used an automated plant. These weren't clay bricks. These were bricks made out of fly ash and other cementitious materials. But what we were trying to do is to reduce the carbon footprint because brick making in Pakistan is a very energy intensive process. The brick kilns that work on are all designed to work on coal and not just coal that you get from or coal with low sulfur content, very high sulfur content local coal which produces huge amounts of greenhouse gases, and it even produces ashes which circulate within the environment and the atmosphere of our cities. And that's one of the reasons why during the winter seasons the smog becomes so much that they have to close out the brick kilns in Pakistan now because so much pollution is caused by them. So um, taking one step at a time, I decided that I would make my own little contributions in how those little factors within the construction can be changed. We had studied a number of things in our engineering degree as well. How to look at orientation, how to look at shading opportunities within the buildings, how daylight incorporation could be done, how sensors could be used to reduce the amount of electricity in the in specifically for lighting, and not even for lighting now. Now we have other solutions as well. But we had studied all of those, but almost nothing was being done on ground, especially in the residential sector. There were some multinationals who were doing it for their own corporate buildings or corporate environments, but very little still. So I wanted to make those changes. There was a huge opportunity, a huge gap that needed to be filled. So I realized that we can make those changes. And with the fact that through some very good friends of mine who've been working abroad, who've been working here in Pakistan, who had worked on research over these topics, I met some really nice people who, encouraged me that yes, there is potential. There's very little movement on this part, but there is potential. I took the step, and now all our projects that we undertake in Pakistan now are based on green energy principles, green building principles. So energy efficiency, energy sufficiency, insulation of buildings, how the buildings are oriented, the air quality, the comfort and convenience of the inhabitants of the building. They are now our core principles. So we
But
don't work on traditional
is it
methods anymore.
expensive? Is it expensive?
It is not actually. This is a misnomer. This is a myth that has been made and it is actually a bit more expensive when you do it in the Western countries. I understand that. But in Pakistan, through our vernacular architecture, we already had a number of options that were cheaper than how the construction is being done right now. A few, or not a few years ago, but at least around 70, 80 years ago, lime and mud were intrinsic part of how buildings were made. I'm not saying we go back to that time, but that means that there are other sustainable methods which are not necessarily more expensive. And if we dive deeper into it, the construction in Pakistan, it's a relic of the way construction was being done by the Britishers. It married into certain traditional methodologies that were inherently here in the subcontinent. But even the Britishers have moved on.
Yeah.
The construction methodologies have moved on, but we are stuck in that relic of the past where, and one major reason for that is the inherent inertia in the whole cultural society or the culture or the society of Pakistan that's been built up. If you see, we are not too kind towards people who want to bring about change. Status
Yeah.
quo, something that a lot of people are very comfortable with and want to stay in. So what we've realized through all of this is that building sustainably, where energy efficiency is a core part of the project, actually could be even cheaper than how
Hmm.
construction is being done right now, because we over design a number of things.
Yeah.
Especially in the structural design part of the buildings, we over design. We use excessive concrete, excessive steel, which is energy intensive.
Hmm.
10% of the whole carbon emissions
Yeah.
in the world are caused by these two things. And we have thought of these two materials as probably the backbone of having structural stability and integrity of the whole structure. Actually, it's not. Actually, there are a number of other ways in which you could do it much better. The point being that there are ways in which you could utilize waste, industrial waste, and lock it inside the buildings. You could replace virgin materials that are more expensive. In Pakistan, the construction materials have gone extremely expensive because of the inflation and the currency devaluation. So there is that potential for using cheaper and much more sustainable materials, even waste products from industrial processes, and lock them in building and bring the cost down.
Um, I understand that even the basic architectural and construction codes might not be followed in Pakistan. But I'm interested to know, are there any building regulation codes are um, which considers all the greenhouse gas emission, as you mentioned while you launched this brick company? And are there any policies supporting, or any are there any basic, like again, codes and stuff that mentions that this is recommended that the buildings, like newly constructed buildings in Pakistan, should be X amount of this and that? Because like currently living in Ireland, and when I look at the legislations, so they are very clear in terms of numbers. So they tell like any new building should have a BER rating of this and that. So again, I'll not come to the implementation here, but there are things in place. So are there any things in place which must be followed? Just my part A of the question is, are there any? And then we come to implementation of those.
Yeah, implementation is a problem. Regular
But
laws
are there
implementation.
any which are like green?
So, um, the first energy code that came for buildings in Pakistan was in 2011.
Mhm.
However, it excluded any building that consumed less than 100 or was rated to use less than 100 kilowatt load. So that excluded a number of apartment buildings as well, and most of the residences, almost all residences. And they were not obligatory or mandatory to be followed as well. So it was a half-hearted effort, something that came out, was not, I guess, the most comprehensive document that could become the backbone of how energy efficiency is applied in the country. Recently, just a month ago or 1.5 months ago, a new code has been launched. This is called the ECBC, Energy Conservation Building Code of Pakistan. It was actually written in 2023, but has been launched in 2024. It covers many of those aspects that you were referring to. It has touched upon a number of those factors in the latest revision that has come up. So now, for the first time, we have regulations that control the envelope of the building, how much, as you were mentioning, the R value or the resistance value to heat transfer has to be for walls, for windows, for roofs. I myself believe that it's still not good enough. The values that have been put up are very low considering the harsh climate of Pakistan, the weather, how harsh it gets, and how much of the locals of the structure that we already make is conducive to heat gains and heat losses. So the insulation values that have been proposed are not adequate enough. However, they have been proposed. Similarly, certain design and spatial considerations have also been given this time, that certain, how functionally the building has to be designed. So energy audits are also mentioned. A number of factors and a number of initiatives have been mentioned this time, and it's a good effort. It's something in the right direction. However, it's like taking one node out of a very large problem and trying to fix that. Not even fix that, trying to give someone suggestions or give someone, a code on which they'll work. Uh, it's in the right direction, a step in the right direction. However, I would say this is at least 10 years too late. It's still 10 years behind what's actually required. And it needs to be more thorough. It needs to have an all encompassing policy behind it.
Mhm.
So, I need to actually make it mandatory that all housing societies, all regulatory bodies that make their own bylaws for the own constituencies and own areas have to have them incorporated in their bylaws and regulations. Otherwise, it will become just another code that would be used by people like me, probably, or other people who are trying to get something done here, would refer to it. But other than that, it won't be a completely successful venture.
Okay, I have an interesting question. So not following the codes in general, not just the green code, is it a matter of um, education, or is it a matter of like affordability? Because like it's for me even it's new to learn that in Pakistan it's not expensive to be building on green practices, but like the common knowledge is that yes, it is expensive. So is it a matter
Hmm.
of education, or is it a matter of affordability?
Huh. Hmm. I think it's more a matter of education. Considering that if there are affordable solutions to the problems and they make the building more sustainable, more energy efficient, then why not? Uh, Actually, the whole problem is that because the way our society is structured, I'm sorry, I have to say it a couple of times again, but uh, we have still not realized how hard global warming is hitting us. It's still
Mm-hmm.
not in the mainstream. I'm sure you must know it better that climate issues still do not impact the lives of the common man. They do, that they don't realize it. They don't realize how the circle works and how anything and everything that they're facing right now, even in urban areas, semi-urban areas, rural areas, how climate change has impacted them. So once that realization truly hits that the problem being caused, the problems that they are facing in terms of environmental pollution, the excessive heat waves that come much more frequently than they ever came before, when they realize how it's been triggered, I think people would make this connection. But that awareness that needs to come, especially in the AEC industry, that's not there. And it's being compounded by the fact that the government or the regulatory bodies are not serious enough, probably, to impose those regulations that need to be imposed, because it's the carrot or stick issue. If the carrot doesn't work, the stick has to come. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're trying to, you're not even giving the carrot, the people are not doing it, there is no stick. So there is no incentive for anyone to do all of that. So if people try and do any sustainable construction without having the requisite knowledge, it
Yeah.
will get more expensive. And once it looks to be more expensive, they'll not go for it. The whole cycle needs to be fixed. All the stakeholders need to get involved. How the legislation improves the whole thing, how the architects and the designers, the contractors, the builders, they understand why it is important, and then the whole ecosystem understands that the construction methodology right now needs to change. There are a number of ways, very little small efforts that we can make that will change the way construction is thought of. It's how it's designed, how it's
Can
executed.
you
A
give
lot of
some, yeah, can you give some examples of those little changes? Because you said it like three times, little changes. So I'm just interested in knowing the little changes. I
it
understand
is.
the brick and
Mhm.
about the brick company. Did that work out? And was the brick cheaper than the ordinary brick, or was it expensive than
Actually,
that?
it was. When we started out, it was cheaper.
Wow.
It was, we could compete with the local brick, and we had, a better quality finish of the brick. It was fully sized. Actually, when you get bricks in Pakistan, they're about a half an inch or a quarter of an
Yeah.
inch short from what the regular size should be. But because we were making it out of proper machinery, we got it a full size brick, fair faced on both sides, a better quality finish, higher compressive strength than a regular brick, less water absorption than a regular brick, using industrial waste and locking it in within our brick, and therefore the structure. So environmentally better, the sound insulation properties were better, heat insulation properties were better, the compressive strength was better, water absorption value. So all of that was good, and it was cheaper. Even then, it was difficult for us to convince people to go for it, because there's so much inertia and skepticism when it comes to changing the very integral part of how buildings are made in Pakistan. However, we did well. We There was some movement on this part. This industry was coming along. A number of other producers were making bricks as well. So there was some movement towards it. However, in 2021 and 2021, when the global commodity prices shot up, and production costs in Pakistan went up with the higher electricity costs, the fuel prices went up, the labor prices went up, the transportation costs went up. And the major factor being that the coal prices throughout the world rose. I'm going into too much detail, but the fact is that it became untenable for us to produce it in the same cost. However, it didn't mean that the option of substituting a brick went away. We made another product. So we went and we changed our recipe, and we made another product. Now it wasn't a brick, it was a block, but the block was cheaper than a regular block. So, there's constant innovation that we could do. And coming to your question, how little changes can be made. Uh, in designing buildings, usually in Pakistan, I'm talking regarding the architectural community here most of all. Very little thought is given to how your building is being glazed. The glazing and the openings of the building where the windows are to be put up, they need to be adjusted according to the orientation of the building. No, you do not want south facing huge 10 feet by 20 feet windows right at the front of the house, because that is a huge solar gain. A huge amount of heat will come through, whether even if you try and double glaze it or use low emissivity glass as well. But that was not even a discussion for people. The only discussion was whether it looks good or not. For how long will we continue to talk about what looks good and does not give us any practical solutions or practical comfort within our homes? It is so common, especially in the upscale community, that upscale housing sector that is here in Pakistan now in the urban areas. That aesthetically, if it looks good, they'll do it. And a lot of architects, unfortunately, are doing it. Another little factor, having a, a window. I'm talking about just basic stuff. I can give other examples as well. But a window which is wider and less in height will have more heat ingress rather than a window which is narrower but taller. And that means that your structural cost will also come down.
Mhm.
Once again, the detail in that I'll not go into, but
Mhm.
these are just little things that we do not look into. There are light shelves that you could make that will shade your windows or the openings and still bring in light. Then there's a very serious issue of over designing of structures. Structural engineers in Pakistan, not all of them, and I don't want to name anyone, but a lot of them uh, over design the structures. Why? Because they do not want to put in the effort to look for other substitutes and other technologies or innovations in how the structure is to be designed, which will reduce the usage of highly energy intensive materials like cement and steel. They'd go about the business as they've always done, and then they are not sure of the quality of work that the contractor would put up. They're not sure whether the steel reinforcement that's going to be done would be done correctly. So they compensate for it by adding extra steel in the designs. So that even if the contractor doesn't do its job well, they've added in another factor to safeguard the building. This is, you can imagine how foolish that is. That you, rather than solving the problem at on the site or when the building is being constructed, they try to compensate it just in their own designs. And you can understand that how much costly that becomes then, and how much more energy intensive and you know carbon carbon emission increase that you get because of these, including these materials. Then uh, the amount of cement that's used in concreting, you could easily substitute normal at least 20% of this your cement use in any construction, any building, by using class F fly ash. It's a byproduct of coal burning. And by fly ash is produced in Pakistan, there are a number of coal power plants and coal-based boilers that are working in Pakistan, and you could use that fly ash to substitute quite a bit of cement in your buildings. That alone would reduce the cost of your structures, and I'm not going to any other details, by around 10% or 11 to 12% of your structures. Just these 3 to 4 things that I've mentioned, if they are designed properly, they'll reduce the cost of the structure. They will mean that your carbon footprint of the building has been reduced because you're using less of those materials which are energy intensive. Then you are locking in an industrial waste, a byproduct of industrial processes in your building. Through all of that, you're reducing the carbon footprint, you're reducing the cost. The margin that you get from reducing the cost of your building is available for you to use for passive energy efficiency measures. You could insulate your building with the amount of money you saved, which was not done in the design process. And then once you have that philosophy, when you're saving that money and you're going into passive energy efficiency, Pakistan could save billions of dollars every year if even 20% energy saving is introduced in our buildings, and not all the buildings that are there, just the buildings that are going to be constructed this year, just the houses that are going to be constructed this year, if they were to be made 20% better in energy efficiency through these measures, Pakistan could save about $2.2 billion. That's going to be, and the consumer is saving that, but that means that the fossil fuels, that the fuel that you had to buy, you don't need to buy it, and that's foreign currency reserves that get depleted, they do not. And with that, you can possibly introduce a much better lifestyle for the occupants of the building so that they live in a more comfortable environment. For just to give you an example, the Deamir Bhasha Dam, that's become such a big thing for Pakistanis here, or for the governments here. It's a sore point as well. That's going to cost around $15 billion in 10 years. And you could save within those 10 years around $22 billion. Rather than spending $15 billion, you could be actually saving $22 billion. You don't need to make that dam. And you would be reducing the energy usage by $22 billion. So these are numbers that people have worked on and they can see. And so
Have
this
you
holistic,
been have you been like acknowledged, appreciated, or endorsed by government in any way for your
not
first?
right now, not right now. We are still working towards that actually. The government, there are two things to it. Firstly, how we want to be involved in the construction in Pakistan. Just the government introducing or government acknowledging us or recognizing us is probably something that we aspire to later. We want to actually bring about a change in how the local private industry is working, because the government would, of course, they'd be interested in what we want to do it, but I think there's a much bigger sector, the private sector, because it hits them hard. The electricity bills right now in Pakistan, they hit every common man very hard. If they see there's a way in which they could, have a net zero energy building, that means they don't have to pay for their electricity, and it's not just through solar. It's not through active energy efficiency measures. It's actually through passive energy efficiency measures to reducing the energy usage of the building. If they can see that, I think that change can, make a much better or bigger ingress in how the construction works in Pakistan. Government initiatives, unfortunately, in Pakistan are not looked at in the best in the best way. Unfortunately, how the funding is done, there's a number of problems, roadblocks in how that is to be done. The private sector, because it's hitting them hard right now, in terms of hitting them hard in their pockets, I think there's a much bigger chance for us to actually bring a change much quickly through that.
Okay. Can you talk more about some of the challenges apart from the policy constraints, but in terms of technology constraints or consumer side of the constraints, and how did you cope up with those challenges in Pakistan?
Yes, there are a number of factors, a number of levels on which we have had to face challenges. As I mentioned, the capital-centric approach of the client, that's or the investors, that's always very important. We have to, give them that awareness that you could build an energy-efficient building and not spend like in limb on it. So you could do it in lesser cost. So that approach, that awareness, that inclination to change the way they think about it, that's
How
one
can
of
we
the
bring about this change? Because speaking of Ireland, even there's so many policies and implementation and stuff. But when it comes to the mindset of the person who is decision maker of the house, it is even a constraint in a well developed and like again educated country like Ireland. So for example, if like government is giving funding, there's no policy constraints, there's no funding constraints. Government is providing you money and everything for the home improvements, but still people are reluctant because the decision maker of the house is reluctant to the
Mm,
change, even in a place like
mm,
Ireland. So, and
mm,
it's been difficult. There's so much research. Even my personal research is addressing how can we change the mindset, and that is why So for example, I am still looking at the energy savings, but then I'm trying to look for health and comfort related benefits to be addressed to the like decision maker of the residential buildings. Because if you go to them and just tell them about energy savings, they're maybe just not interested. So how to change that mindset in Pakistan? Because the decision maker is again the might be old or yeah.
Actually, what we found out is that talking about the climate or the impact of climate change, global warming, and trying to make a homeowner understand that and how it impacts them is eventually the right pathway to take. But currently, to bring them towards that, a much more conducive way is to focus on the cost of construction and the cost of living. I think that
Mm-hmm.
is the way that we are trying to bring about a change in people's mindsets. So we do not want to tell them that it is their responsibility that they have to work towards climate change and all of that. It is, and we are not shying away from it. It's not that we are denying their role or responsibility in trying to tackle climate change and in the way they live, in the lifestyle that they adopt. That of course impacts how our climate's future is to be in the next few years. But a more receptive, yeah, a more conducive way for them to be receptive is trying to tell them how it's of benefit to them right now, how it impacts their living standards, how it impacts their pockets, how cost effective it is. And that is why the model that we are taking is the net zero model. We try to tell them that your energy costs will come down and you would be able to, your energy requirements will come down, and you would be able to fulfill your energy requirements through whatever active energy efficiency system you install. So that whether that's photovoltaics or other ways in which you do it. So that's the way what we are trying to do. That's just my personal perspective or the perspective of our company. However, um it cannot be done on grassroots level or on a level of the masses unless the government legislates and implements it. So that is a very long road. That's probably a road that's going to take a while. It's taken a while in even the Western countries where law abiding citizens are much more common than here in Pakistan. But even then, it's taken a lot of time. In Pakistan, of course, it will take time, but the methodology to make people understand why is it important is probably a bit different here, or is
Yeah,
probably something that we believe needs to be
yeah.
put at the forefront, the cost
Um,
factor.
yeah. So forgive me for my next stupid question, but because I'm not an architect, I need to
Okay.
ask this. Um, so once a building is like, I understand there could be so many little things again that we can do when we're building a new building. But what if there is a old building? And for example, I think in one person's lifetime in Pakistan, people hardly are able to, especially now, make only like build only one building. So now what if, like, for example, my house in Pakistan that's constructed, I can't demolish it and like construct again. So are there any architectural solutions or engineering solutions that might your company provide to do the improvements now to help with the to make it a net zero building or zero building or passive house or whatever?
Yeah, we call it retrofitting.
Yeah,
That's the
right.
term we use for redoing the house. And if you want to do an energy retrofitting of the house, it is possible. Of course, depends on how the building has been designed and constructed before, but
Mm-hmm.
it is possible. And you might not be able to, include or inculcate every possible measure towards
Yeah.
sustainability and efficiency, but there are certain things that you could very readily or easily do that will
Can you give some
suddenly,
examples of because
yes.
where
Yeah.
I know retrofitting and all the little examples I can think of retrofitting is in terms of the heating perspective, like applying the insulation on the buildings and so all that sort, because my research is in Ireland and that is not applicable for Pakistan's case because there we're trying to look for cooling things. So can you give some example from architecture? How can we do that?
It works the same way because whether you want to keep your building cool or
Mhm,
hot, or whether you want to, shield your building from cold
mhm,
weather outside or hot weather outside, the basic principle is the same. It's insulation.
mhm,
So insulating even an old building is not a difficult task if you have enough space in the sense that you could use. There's a system called exterior insulation and finishing system. It's a typical generic term. It's not a company that does it. It's a generic way of doing it. So you could insulate even your old building very well through using. There are a number of insulating materials from EPS, XPS, there's polyurethane, there's cellulose, there's a number of materials that are available. So you could insulate the building. Then a very important part is insulating your roof because a major contributor to solar heat gain is your roof. So if you try and do that, your walls and your windows, because if they're old windows, they'll probably either be metal, maybe could be aluminum, but in any case, you need to probably change that. Although that's an expense, but to mitigate that expense, what you could probably do is inculcate shading techniques,
mhm.
so that those windows that get a lot of direct sunlight or heat, you try and shade them from there. So you could use vegetation. You could use uh, trees that probably shade you from sunlight coming from that angle. Then you could shade them from the outside. There are a number of ways in which shading outdoor shades could be included. So those little factors, and then changing the old appliances, changing the old lighting fittings, changing even wiring that's probably not as you say not a good conductor, probably could be old or was
Yeah.
not the best. So changing those little things, they're not little anymore, but changing those things, including automation systems in your buildings, in your house, that's a major way of increasing the energy efficiency of the house. And that's very easily done even in an old building, because you could control the lighting fittings, the power fittings, ACs, and whatever it might be in your house through a centralized hub. And you could turn off or turn on build the lights or any equipment or fixtures whenever needed. So that also saves energy. So insulation, you basically insulate your envelope from the roof, from the walls, from the windows. Try to include shading techniques. And then when inside, you try to remove the old appliances and try and get the most efficient energy rated appliances for your kitchens, for your lighting, for air conditioning, for HVAC, even your geysers, the water boilers, and all of that. So in that way, you could have an older building, but still get energy
Um,
efficiency
you spoke of
rating.
financing and like of course when the changes are required, whether that's a new building or an old building. I'm interested to know, is there any financing mechanism in Pakistan which would support, for example, can I take a loan from bank if I want to retrofit my house or if I want to build a net zero building? Is there any financing mechanism on the top of your head?
No, unfortunately, there isn't. There was a financing scheme in the government which came from 2018 to 2022. There was a financing scheme or a a possibility through which you could get your building. You could get a solar system, a photovoltaic system installed on your building at only 5% interest rate. So you could get a loan from a bank and you could use that to install a solar system on your roof, and the interest rate was only 5% on that.
Okay.
However, that has been discontinued. Other than that, at the moment the interest rates in Pakistan are so high that it is probably very difficult for anyone to try and do that. And there are no incentives for constructing energy efficient
Mm-hmm.
buildings or insulating your building or using passive energy efficiency. So the only thing that came up was for installing a solar system, a photovoltaic system, and that also has been discontinued. However, the ray of hope or the light at the end of the tunnel is that even if Pakistan or the government of Pakistan itself is not doing it, international donors, international organizations are now enforcing certain regulations upon Pakistani companies and even the Pakistani government that they'll have to include certain or they'll have to comply with certain SDGs to get donor funding for projects in the future. Even the floods that came here last year or the year ago, or probably a couple of years ago, the funding that was promised to Pakistan that was about $6 to $7 billion. That was inherently attached with Pakistan complying with certain energy efficiency or carbon emissions related, global warming related, climate change impact related initiatives. So if Pakistan did that, then they'll get that funding in. And there is another aspect that's going to come into Pakistan very soon. That's the issuance of carbon credits, green credits. That's also going to come in to Pakistan through those international donors and international funding agencies in the next 3 or 4 years. So probably that is something that will push either the governments or the banks to invest more in certain energy efficiency in investment areas, in buildings, in infrastructure that is more compliant with international standards, or at least gets some accreditation or certification. For example, it could be LEED, it could be EDGE. So it could be some international certifications that might be mandatory. In that
Mm-hmm.
way, probably some funding opportunities could come up.
Okay. My last question is, how do you see things changing in Pakistan in next 10 or say 20 years?
I think a number of factors are now pushing us towards this direction. I think there is, on a much greater level than ever before, a realization of how the climate change is impacting us because we have been hit hard. Although it's still not come into the residential sector or the housing or the building sector as well as it could have, but there is a realization. Even the energy conservation building code is it probably shows that there is an attempt to come towards this. So one thing is that. Secondly, uh, with international agencies being involved, so that also impacts in how the construction sector, the AEC industry in Pakistan will be shaping up in the future. A lot of multinationals are already working on this. So the corporate sector has to work on this because it is part of their global goals for sustainable development. So probably that is pushing us in that direction. And people like me, people like us, the Building Zero, what we are trying to do is bring about change in in the way, because we have been engaged with the construction industry for the last 15 years. So we know people. We have a circle of people, of architects, builders, contractors who we regularly interact with. And through those people, we are trying to bring about these changes. We're trying to educate them, bring them awareness. So it is moving in the right direction. Uh, Unfortunately, the pace is not good enough right now, and the sooner we get to it, the better. Rather than we waiting till the impacts of climate change become so drastic that whatever we do is not good enough. We are moving towards that direction. In the next 10 to 20 years, Pakistan, through thick and thin, through thick or thin, or through whatever legislation that is forced upon us, will eventually move in this direction. I hope it comes with the right people at the helm of affairs, so that rather than just following Western standards or policies or maybe standards that they have set for themselves, we try and inculcate and include our own practices, our own traditional methods as well. By traditional, I mean not the current one, the ones that we already had, and try to use them to improve the efficiency of the AEC industry. So it will happen. It'll be slow, it will be painful, it'll be challenging, it'll be time consuming, but it will.
All right. Thank you so much, Moeed, for your time, and definitely I learned a lot. Especially, it's always interesting for me personally to learn the contrasting perspectives and things in terms of how things work in Ireland and Pakistan. Once again, thank you so much.